Hello!
Hello?
Ongo Goblogian, the art collector. Charmed, I'm sure.
Yes.
I'm going to invite you to a show.
Okay.
But first, allow me to destroy your gallery.
Oh.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Derivative. That I love. I absolutely love.
Hey Exiles, Chronic Painless here with a little pre-launch update to my Blade Vortex League-Starter build guide for patch 3.27. Yesterday, GGG dropped the full Bloodline Ascendency details on us, and so I figured I should probably put out a little update talking through some of the more notable ones and giving my assessment of how I think they might work or unfortunately not work with the cold BV build. First and foremost, the talk of the town is certainly the Lycia Herald Ascendancy, this farewell to flesh that is going to be giving you huge amounts of Herald buff effect. It's a more multiplier, but there's a pretty big trade-off. You're going to have to reserve a lot of mana with those Heralds in order to really make it work. And a lot of builds are getting very psyched about this. A lot of Elementalist builds especially, because if you synergize this with the Bringer of Ruin, as well as an Essence Worm ring, you can get all the Herald buff effect from the Bringer of Ruin, but not ruin your mana reservation efficiency by actually making it too efficient to get the benefits of this Farewell to Flesh if you are using the Essence Worm. However, this is really not that exciting for BV, and there are several reasons why. The main one is that BV just doesn't have the effectiveness of added damage that a lot of other skills do. BV scales its damage very well in a lot of ways, but added damage is not one of them. And so these buffs that are going to be coming to a lot of builds from jacked up Herald of Ice, from jacked up Herald of Thunder, are going to be really much less impactful for BV. That's not to say we don't benefit from our Herald buffs. The Herald buff effect is usually a pretty strong stat to invest in, but almost all of the heavy lifting there is being done by Herald of Purity. And so there might be ways to make this ascendancy work with some specialization and higher investment. It is not just going to be as easily of a plug and play as it might be for a Wander or other type of spellcaster that might benefit more directly from that added damage. Herald of Ash is kind of in between in that it is neither a more multiplier nor added damage. It's this fizz as extra, and we are definitely able to take advantage of that to an extent. However, you don't really want to invest too much into that early on in the league, because in order to do so, you'll probably have to sacrifice cold damage by making your damage much more generically elemental. And so if you do that, you will have much lower freeze power and lose out on the reliability of freeze as defense. So again, this is something that really seems like it might be much more useful later on in the build. Higher budget levels, higher DPS. This could be the kind of multiplier we're looking for to really kick it into overdrive, but it's not going to be that same zero to hero propping up the build that it will be for builds like a KB Wander. My cold BV League-Starter, on the other hand, uses its Heralds much less for their buff effect and much more for the other utility that they provide. Obviously, Herald of Ice and Herald of Ash provide substantial clear speed with their on-death effects, not to mention the best visuals and sounds in all of Raid class, but they also enable us to use Heraldry in order to have the most reliable source of exposure in the game, one that doesn't even require you to hit the enemy, let alone use a whole second skill. Herald of Ash enables us to proc any sort of ignite conditional effects, like a Sadist notable or a Cinder Swallow Urn, for example. Those are both excellent sources of damage, and having to invest directly in some added fire damage can often be a little awkward, but picking it up from that Herald of Ash, which is also giving you that clear speed, it's giving you a little bit of fire exposure for the fire damage it is dealing, and it's also, of course, going to be buffing our Purposeful Harbinger. Purposeful Harbinger is one of the most powerful notables in the game. Even after the nerf it got when it was first released, you can still stack a couple of Heralds and get a ton of aura effect out of it. And that's definitely something this build wants to take advantage of. And it's partially because of that the Herald Ascendancy here really is going to struggle to fit in to any kind of League starter version of the build. It's going to prevent basically any defensive auras. You'll still get one aura from the Essence Worm that you'll want to run. That'll be free, of course, but the amount of reduced reservation efficiency that worm is going to give, and the fact that you're just going to want to be reserving all of your mana with your Heralds, means that there's really just not going to be room for another aura or even something like Flesh and Stone. And later on in the build, we want to be adding Zealotry, Haste, eventually Petrified Blood, eventually Tempest Shield. There's just so much that we're going to be wanting to use our mana for, at least in the ways that I've played this build before, that trying to make this Ascendancy work is going to require some heavy tinkering and real specialization. However, if you are ready and willing to embrace the pure glass cannon life, then you might be able to get some decent power out of this Ascendancy. Just make sure that you're doing your best to avoid reliance on increased physical damage, avoid reliance on plus gem levels, and consider some empowered envoy clusters, and maybe later on try to get a Sublime Vision going so that you can throw, for example, a Tempest Shield in your Essence Worm. You'll also definitely want to try to pick up a Circle of Ambition with a few buff effect modifiers, as this will provide another great increase for you to hit with that more multiplier from the Farewell to Flesh. So that covers Farewell to Flesh, but there is a Lycia Ascendancy that I am definitely getting a little bit excited about, and that is the Bitter Heresy. Unlike the trade-off of losing tons of reservation efficiency with the Farewell to Flesh, this Ascendancy is going to only ask us to give up our ability to create Consecrated Ground, which was never a huge benefit for the build in the first place, since we already have plenty of regen from the Stone Golem and likely a Vitality Aura. We can also very reliably create Consecrated Ground via Zealotry, which is a natural fit for the build. Profane Ground was already an attractive option that I was experimenting with last league, and now that it is potentially offering even more benefits, it's certainly something I'm going to be looking to take advantage of. As I mentioned in the League Start video, Blade Vortex really has no problem relying on these grounds as a source of damage increase. Right, we're going to be right up in there next to the enemy. We're going to be able to dance around them, and we're hitting often enough, we're critting often enough that Zealotry is always going to be keeping that consecrated, or in this case, profane ground, going. Bitter Heresy will give offense and defense, and also a little bit of sort of pseudo utility in that getting Fizz as extra chaos can really help when there are monsters that have stacked crazy amounts of cold or just elemental resistance. And so having that option of doing another kind of damage when we are going to be always converting 100% of our physical to elemental can be very helpful. Other than that, I'm a little interested in what some of these Farul buffs might actually look and feel like in practice. The numbers on them are pretty nice, but of course having to run a Beast Spectre is not something I've ever really experimented with before, so going to have to do more than just theory crafting there. Going to really have to put it into practice and see. I don't think any of the Delirium bloodlines are going to be that great for us. Definitely don't want to be giving up the ability to use non-cluster jewels, especially later on in the build, and the other effects seem to take far too long in order to actually scale up. Our minions are really just there to act as buff bots, and we don't particularly care about the actual damage that they are doing, and we're certainly not worried about their survivability with the fact that they will be constantly reviving, not to mention being immune to elemental damage. And so Katarina is going to be basically a hard pass. As for the aura effect and charge nodes that are coming from all, it could theoretically be something to get a bunch of grace and hatred effect if you manage to reduce all of you, if you manage to have 0 maximum frenzy charges. However, that's not going to be free to get, and just having one or the other of these effects seems like a complete waste of an ascendancy. 50% increased hatred effect is, 10 or 12% more damage, but that's not nearly enough to want to give up any of the elementalist options. And lastly, with Orloth and his ward, of course it might be worth playing around with this once you get to maybe a super late game Svalin based version of the build. We don't really hit as often as the builds that will take advantage of the 5% chance to restore ward on hit. We hit fairly often, but BV is very limited in your ability to increase your hit rate substantially. And so compared to these projectile and other attack builds that are just rapid fire minigunning across the screen, BV is a much more slow and steady wins the race type of skill. That does it for this video. I am going to try to put out an update to my farming tier list before the league launches on Friday. It's been a while since I made that video, and it is about time I put out something that doesn't talk about how good this build is at Metamorph League. So look for that later. In the meantime, try to stay painless.